Alright, so you clicked on this video because you want to know how to shoot cinematic footage on your DJI Mini 3 Pro. But look no further. In this video, I'm going to break it down for you in 4 easy steps. Now, the first thing you need to know to get cinematic footage on your DJI Mini 3 Pro is to shoot on the right settings. Now, let's break that down for you guys. The first thing you're going to want to know is about shutter speed and ISO. Now, for shutter speed, you're going to want to have your shutter speed based on the frame rate that you're using. We'll touch on frame rates later, but a general rule of thumb is if you're shooting 24 frames per second, you want to have your shutter at 50. If you're shooting at 60 frames per second, you want to have your shutter at 120. Basically, whatever it is that is your frame rate, you want to have your shutter speed as double. The reason for this is that it's going to give you a more natural looking motion blur, and that's going to help stuff to look more cinematic. But a point to note is if you're really high up, it doesn't really matter that much. The motion is only noticeable if you're super close to your subject. So for person that are going really high in the air, getting those vast landscape, then turning up your shutter won't be a major quality deterrent. It won't make your footage look horrible, and you'll probably be able to get away with it. But if you do have the option, usually go for double your frame rate. It's gonna save you some time with the film junkies and basically stop trolls from going hard in your comments. The next thing that I want to go on is your ISO. Personally, for me, I try to never raise my ISO past 100, simply because once you go up past 100, it usually introduces grain. And also, if you're flying drones, you usually are flying drones in bright sunlight, so I don't see any need for you to be going up in your ISO. But as a general rule of thumb for ISO as well, I try to keep my ISO as low as possible so as to not introduce any grain. The next thing that I want to go ahead and touch on is your color profile. Now, the DJI Mini 3 Pro has 2 color profiles. It has normal and D-Cine-like. Now, the difference between these 2 modes is that in normal mode, the drone is basically going to give you a fully colored image that is ready and good to go for whatever platform you're posting it on. And in D-Cine-like, it's going to give you a relatively flat image, which that basically means it's going to take out some of the colors, some of the contrasts. It's just going to give you a more dull looking image. But the benefit of this is that when you get that dull image, you're able to actually go in and color it the way you want to color it. So instances when I use the normal profile is if I don't plan to be doing much color grading in editing, or I'm just going to be sending the footage to a client who probably isn't going to color grade it anyway. Where I'd go ahead and use D-Cine-like is if I know that I want this to be edited in a particular way. I want to be able to add, my personal touch. I'm going to try my best to give myself enough room to add in my particular style and taste. So you can choose which instance you want to shoot, either one in. Another point to note is that D-Cine-like is going to give you 10-bit footage, which is going to give you more room for the colors in your image. So if you have a really bright sky and a really dark background, it's going to give you more room inside that image. While if you're shooting normal, it won't give you as much depth in your colors and your contrast. So it's really just a matter of how much depth you need in your image, or if you want to do any editing in post. Alright, so next thing I want to touch on is resolution and frame rate, which I kind of touched upon before, but basically you're just going to choose the resolution based on what you want. I tend to always shoot in 4K simply because either I'm going to export in 4K or I'm going to want to crop in for a 1080p timeline. So 4K is going to give you a wider range of resolution. I always shoot at 24 frames per second. I don't like to slow down my drone footage, so I'm not usually shooting higher than that. But the DJI Mini 3 Pro does give you different options for frame rates, so feel free to experiment on the ones you like. I do think there are times when you can shoot in higher frame rates, maybe if you're capturing some action, maybe like a car chase or high speed stuff. But for me, I'm always shooting it on 24 frames per second. Regardless of the frame rate that you shoot, just ensure that your shutter speed is double your frame rate so that you can capture that smooth looking motion. Alright, so the next thing I want to touch upon is white balance. Now guys, if you're using the DJI Mini 3 Pro, never use auto white balance. Matter of fact, never use auto anything. The entire point of me giving you these setting suggestions is that you don't shoot anything auto. Now, the issue with using auto white balance is this. If your drone is, moving and, looking on different subjects, then it might change your white balance depending on what it thinks is the appropriate light. So always set your white balance. If it's cloudy, maybe you can use like a 6500. Daylight is typically 5500 Kelvin. So just set a consistent white balance based on what you think looks okay and work with that. You do not want to be changing your white balance in the middle of your shots, and you don't want your white balance to be adjusting consistently. The next thing I'm going to touch upon is sharpness and noise reduction. Now, the DJI Mini 3 Pro has a bit of in-camera sharpening, which I don't like, and a bit of in-camera noise reduction. So I'm going to leave my custom settings here. For noise reduction, I use -1, and for sharpness, I use -2. I don't like the in-camera sharpness, nor do I like the in-camera noise reduction. So I tend to dial those down and, handle it myself in post. And the next thing within the settings I'm going to touch on is the coding format. Now, the DJI Mini 3 Pro has two coding formats. It has MP4 and MOV. Now, typically MP4 is a format that is accepted by most devices, and MOV is made to run smoothly on Macs. So I generally shoot MP4 because I edit on a PC, but if you're a Mac user and you're going to be distributing your stuff for other Mac users, you can go ahead and use MOV. And lastly, a big thing that I'm going to give you guys as an extra tip is to turn on your overexposure warning. Now, the reason why you want to have overexposure warning on is that when you're flying, you might not be able to tell, especially if you're shooting decine, like what are the brightest parts of your image, because the image is going to be a bit dull. So with the overexposure warning, you're basically turning on your zebras. So what it's telling your camera is this: if this part of the image is blown out, it's going to have some lines going across, so you know that, okay, this right here is blown out and there's not any information there. What that is going to do is going to help you to ensure that you're shooting, what you want in the right exposure. That's just a little assistance that is a key to helping you get better shots. So step number 2 is use your ND filters. Now, what are ND filters, you might ask? Now, in layman's terms, or as simple as I can put it, ND filters are basically sunglasses for your drone. Now, because you're flying your drone high up in the air and it's usually very bright because of the sun, you're going to want to use ND filters to help you to get the proper exposure for your image. If you don't use ND filters, you're going to have to turn up your shutter speed, which is going to let your image look a bit choppy when it comes to motion. So if you want to get the ideal motion and you don't want to turn up your shutter speed, you're going to have to get you some ND filters. Also, if you're trying to shoot long exposure photos on your drone, which those are basically the photos where the motion on things looks kind of fluid because you turn on the shutter so much that it's like things almost blend into each other. Things almost basically blend into each other. Like, if you've ever seen those pictures where like the water looks very blended, or it looks like it's not moving, it looks like it's one. I'll show an example, but basically if you want to do long exposure photography with your drone, then you're going to need to get ND filters as well. So if you guys are looking for ND filters, I use the Sky brand, which you can find the link in the description below. Also, if you guys have been enjoying this video so far, feel free to share it with a friend or to subscribe. It's going to help me to make more videos like this just for you. All right, so point number 3 is shoot at the right time of day. Now guys, when you just get your drone, you're going to be tempted to just shoot all the time. But here's the truth. Not all lighting is equal, and there are going to be particular times of the day when you're going to get better looking footage and better looking shots. Typically, the best times to shoot are golden hour, which is going to be when the sun is rising and when the sun is about to set. When it's kind of in between, it's going to be a lot more harsher. There are exceptions for that, especially if you live in a more cloudy environment. If it's cloudy, then it might lend better to exposing your shots because things are going to be on one consistent level. But you find in the brightest of suns, stuff usually looks a little bit more harsh. And it depends if that's the look you're going for. You might be going for a more harsh, look, and shooting in, 12 p.m. sun might be great for you. But if you're going for that softer, gentle, gradual, cinematic look, then shooting at either sunrise or sunset is going to give you those majestic looking shots. I love sunsets, I love sunrise. Everything overall just looks at, a more even exposure. But again, it really depends on the message that you're conveying. So if you're going for that harsh, bright, super sunny look, then it might be perfect for you to shoot at that bright sunny time. But generally speaking, I tend to enjoy my shots closer to sunrise or in sunset. All right, and the last tip for you guys is number 4, use intentional movements. Now, when you just get your drone, you're probably going to be tempted to just fly all over the place, just zoom off, get things going as fast as possible. But the best piece of advice that I can give to you is to be very intentional with your movements and your subject. I think the most cinematic shots are very slow and controlled. So the best thing that you can do is find a subject and just decide how is it that you want to convey, or how do you want to show the subject. So whether it is that you want to slowly reveal by pulling your drone back, whether you want to track your subject and show how fast they're moving, basically make effort to pre-plan your movements. Don't just go up in the air and start flying all around, because one, you're gonna waste your batteries, and two, you're not gonna know what you're doing till afterwards. I just think of what is the intention I'm trying to convey, what is the message I'm trying to send, and that's how I go ahead and do my drone shots. So if you're using intentional movements, your shots are gonna be a lot more cinematic, and persons are gonna be like, hey, we need to shoot some drone stuff for us. So trust me, intentional movements usually means, pre-planned shots, or even if it's not pre-planned, once you're in the air, you can decide, do I want to orbit around this person? Do I want to, show like a top-down bird's eye view? Just make your movements very slow and intentional. And that's going to be keys to getting cinematic footage. All right, so if you guys enjoyed this video about how to get cinematic shots on your DJI Mini 3 Pro, then the YouTube algorithm says you're going to love this video right here.